Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One Year Bible, and we examine some questions that extend our learning from the sermon on Sunday. Today I'm joined by Sheryl Daughety and Wendy Korbusieski, and we're looking at a passage from Deuteronomy chapter 2. I'm going to read a few of those verses beginning in verse 23. It says, "At that time I pleaded with the Lord and said, O sovereign Lord, you have only begun to show your greatness and the strength of your hand to me, your servant. Is there any God in heaven or on earth who can perform such great and mighty deeds as you do? Please let me cross the Jordan to see the wonderful land on the other side, the beautiful hill country and the Lebanon mountains. But the Lord was angry with me because of you, and he would not listen to me. That's enough, he declared. Speak it no more." So, when I read this text about Moses begging God to permit him to enter the promised land, my heart is somewhat torn, about it. It really is one of the most difficult passages in all of the Bible to read, because he put up with a lot of stuff. So why wouldn't God allow Moses to at least enter the land?
It looks like God's decision was an act of judgment. And I say that because of Numbers 8 through 12, which records the account of Moses striking the rock out of anger. You and Aaron must take the staff and assemble the entire community. As the people watch, speak to the rock over there, and it will pour out its water. You will provide enough water from the rock to satisfy the whole community and their livestock. So Moses did as he was told. He took the staff from the place where it was kept before the Lord. Then he and Aaron summoned the people to come and gather at the rock. "Listen, you rebels," he shouted. "Must we bring you water from this rock?" Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with the staff, and water gushed out. So the entire community and their livestock drank their fill. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel, you will not lead them into the land I am giving them." So God instructed Moses to speak to the rock so the water would be provided for the people. But in his anger, Moses struck the rock twice with his staff. Because of his sin and his pride and uncontrolled anger, God did not permit Moses to lead the people into the promised land. Instead, Joshua would be the person who would become the leader of that group.
What struck me, and yes, the pun is intended, was, that Moses, there at the end of his life, once he realized that God was not going to relent and allow him to enter that land, had to be a heavy weight on him. And so if you put yourself in Moses' shoes, his whole life purpose was kind of almost felt like it was crumbling right there. It had to be very devastating for him. That he was kind of born to lead Israel. That was his life's purpose. And he was sitting right there at the precipice of the promised land, and he couldn't step over into it. And the people that he has been with, who have continually criticized and complained and moaned and grumbled, it's like you want to, like, that's the reason. But that was his burden. That was his sin. And now he's aware that not only he wouldn't be able to enter the promised land, but that his kids, Gershom and Eleazar, wouldn't even be his successors. So, that there was a legacy that he wouldn't even be able to pass down to his children. So, like, as a double clutch, double punch there for him. And so what could have led him into this depression, or possibly, allowed him to just sit back and say, well, throw his hands up and say, I've done all I can do. I'm just going to just cross my arms and just rest on my laurels here, and just like, well, now it's your turn, guys. I've done my part. He's told me no. I know that, my job is done here. Instead, what he chose to do is, inspire the people. He chose to invest in them this message of hope. And that's what that whole book of Deuteronomy, that very next book, is about. That's why we have it. He chose to give this message of hope and this covenant that God had was given to his people, instill that into those people's hearts.
Yeah, and I suppose what Moses said in verse 24 was an indication of that great hope that he possessed. O sovereign Lord, you have only begun to show your greatness and the strength of your hand to me, your servant. So Moses was showing that he was convinced his lifelong vision for Israel was still about to come to pass. He still had hope in that.
Yeah, and so this week, the sermon Sunday, yesterday actually, would have been on heaven and hell. And I thought it was interesting to note that throughout the Bible, the promised land becomes this powerful symbol of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a lot of songs written about it, you know. And Hebrews 4:1 says God's promise of entering his rest still stands, so we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. And then in Galatians 4, verse 26, he says, but the other woman, Sarah, represents the heavenly Jerusalem. She is the free woman, and she is our mother. And then in Revelation, toward the very end, verse 2 of chapter 21, it says, and I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. So this passage speaks to us about the hope we have of heaven. Even at the end of life, we must become communicators, right? We must be willing to tell people there's a hope for the future. And you will often find that people become more intentional about that the closer they get to death. You know, so do you think that hoping for heaven is this type of escape mentality, like people just wanting to get out of their trouble rather than understanding heaven as a hope given through Christ?
When I hear escape mentality, I think about people trying to like creatively ignore the reality that they're living in. And I don't think anybody who sincerely believes in heaven has that mindset, because I don't think anybody who truly believes in the promise of heaven would consider ignoring the realities and the responsibilities of their daily life and caring for others, because the way Jesus taught, he taught that in tandem. He taught plenty of lessons about heaven, but he also taught plenty of lessons about your responsibility for your life and your actions, and plenty of lessons about caring for people and others. So I don't think they're exclusive from one another. I don't think, speaking about heaven or instilling hope about heaven is an escape at all. I think they go together.
Yeah, and I think that it's natural to hope for heaven because of the results of sin and all the difficulties that we face here on earth. And of course, we want to experience what's been promised to us, and that's a good thing because it's something that everybody is looking forward to. But I do think that it is possible, though, to ignore what God has called you to do and how he's called you to live here until that time comes. I do think that it's possible to use it as an escape, almost like an excuse to not, because that's the end, why bother now? I feel like I see some people who live that way, and I don't say that in judgment so much as like, gosh, you still have so much left to give. There's so much left for you to do here. Look at the people that God's put in your life that you have influence over and that you could give that same hope to that we're talking about.
There's a lot of cliches about like, you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good.
Yeah.
And I think that, I have acknowledged before that if you go to the turn of the 19th century, so late 1800s, early 1900s, the evangelical movement was so poor and so uneducated that almost all of the songs in the hymn books that were published in the early 1900s, a big portion of them are about heaven. When we all get to heaven, just over in the glory land, I'm going to take a trip on the old gospel ship. When the roller's caught up yonder, there's just tons and tons of them. And some of that was a tad of escapism, right? Because what they had was not so good. They had to believe that eternity was better.
Right.
And in modern days, we don't talk. We do not have songs about heaven. One will come along every so often, and it resonates so much. So, like, I can only imagine, right? It resonates so much that people are like, "Oh my God, this is great." Let's talk about heaven, but we just don't do it because, and part of the reason is because we have evangelicals in general who believe in a rapture and or taking away or a new heaven and a new earth have arrived at a place of power and prominence and financial security. It's not like it was 150 years ago or even 100 years ago. Frankly, not even like it was when I was in my early childhood in that, in the Christian world. And so I think it has some impact on us. I think we can go both ways. We can put too much emphasis on it, and we can put not enough emphasis on it. We can pretend like it's never going to happen.
Right.
And because this is a real challenge, frankly. And I had someone who they have a particular political bent, and they'll occasionally come to me and ask me some question because I think they think I am going to be a critical thinker about it, whether I am or not. I can't tell you that, but they were asking particularly about Christians and global warming. And they were saying, are Christians so unconcerned about global warming that, and he used the word evangelical Christians, not as a compliment, but he was he was asking, are they so unconcerned about global warming they believe they're going to escape, right? So they don't have to do what is the right thing, and when they should be doing the right thing, and because 3 degrees Fahrenheit, and this ain't a science podcast, how much difference it would make in the world, right? They should do the right thing. And my answer to him was, the overwhelming majority of people driving global warming aren't evangelical Christians. That's just the bottom line, right? It's not prominent. They're not prominent in China. They're not prominent in India. Those are the two places that are creating the most global warming right this minute. So to make that argument is semi-nonsense, right? Here in America, they may be the ones voting for a particular party that may not view restrictions on industry but here's what I'm going to tell you, and this is what I told him. I said, if you ask an evangelical Christian, name the top 10 reasons you voted for whoever, global warming or industrial, what's the word? Deregulation, right? Is that the right word? Is not going to be on that Christian's list, right? They're not going to, deregulation is, of an industry, let people blow whatever smoke they want to. That's not at the top of their list. That's not why they're voting. They may fall into that camp, but it's a false argument. Now, what I will say is the tension has to be, now, do I think there are some people, because I've heard this argument made, hey, we're leaving, we don't care, right? That's the wrong attitude to have. The answer, the right answer is, there is coming a day when it's all coming to an end, period, right? You can't read the scriptures without believing that. But until it does, you have to steward what you've been given, whether it's the earth or your money or your life. And that tension is always at play. It's always at play. The people that you were talking about who you believe have so much more to offer have given up on that tension, right? They've rolled to the other side and believe they don't have to steward their life or their gifts or their talents or their abilities anymore. They just got to they're going to do whatever they want to do. And some of this it comes because my circle is also older, because I'm getting older. But for whatever reason, this consistently over the last 2 or 3 years keeps coming into my conversations. Retirement's not a biblical concept, right? It's not. There's nothing in the Bible that says there comes a day you get to quit, right? You get to stop. Now, it may change, it may shift, it may differ, but there's never a day say, I'm going home with Jesus. I'm done. That's not it. The day you're done is the day you're done, right? John Maxwell says some people are dead. They just haven't been buried yet, right? You know,
Yes.
and there's a lot of truth to that, you
Mhm.
know. And we have to guard against escapism, because I believe that's possible. And I don't know what the opposite of escapism is, but in my opinion, the great temptation to Christians today is not escapism; it is neverism. You know,
Oh,
the rapture's never
yeah.
going to happen. The end's never going to happen. I'm going to build a big house. I'm going to get big
Mhm.
cars. I'm going to put money in the bank, and I'm going to live here forever.
Denial.
In my nice, yeah,
That's just
yeah.
denial.
And they both are dangerous.
Mhm.
How can we communicate the hope found in the gospel message to others? I'll go first. Can I go first on this?
Go
I
ahead.
want to share something, because this is something I personally am working on. I don't know. I can take you back 5, 6, 7 years, but it's been longer than that, over the last 5 years or so. But I have worked on toning down my abrasiveness, right? You know, just trying to dial it back so it's not as abrasive. But something that more recent, what is it?
When he's
You
laughing
abrasive
at you.
what?
Something that I have tried to work on more recently is figuring out how that I can encourage more and offer people more hope. And I can't retell the story, so you should go look it up. William McRaven, he was an admiral. He oversaw all the special forces over every armed services, so Army, Navy, Marines, all of it. I heard him speak a couple of weeks ago, and I had read the story, but to hear him tell it was kind of interesting. So he talks about, he tells us, the way he tells stories is he'll tell something about himself, and then he'll tell an application later. And so he tells the story, but then as he's the special forces of overall, part of his job is to go in and visit people who've been wounded, some of his men. And so he goes to this hospital. For some reason, I'm thinking it's in Afghanistan. And they have some of the special forces, you know, Army, Navy, Marines, Rangers, SEALs, those kind of things. And he visits with them. They've been injured in some kind of thing. And before he leaves, they say, hey, we've got another guy down here that's never been, he's not a special forces, but he's been injured. Would you come talk to him? So he goes down there and he finds this guy who has lost both legs and both arms.
Mm-hmm.
And he's propped up against the wall so he can talk, right? So he can stand and address this admiral and talk to him. And he relays this story about what great spirits this guy was in. And he, you know, how he encouraged him, but he said it meant so much for him, because in those ranking officers mean something when one of them comes to speak to you. That's a big deal in the Army or Navy or Marines, whatever. And anyway, he tells this story, you know, and about leaving, and he said the lesson, and this was every story he told, he said there's a lesson. He said, never miss an opportunity to share hope with somebody. When it's presented, never miss an opportunity to share hope. He said, he talked about I could have left the building, right? I visited the people I was supposed to visit. He said, but I had an opportunity to offer hope to one more person. And I did. And he said, never miss the opportunity. And we had dinner, all of us together, the next night. And we were talking about the things that we heard. And that was one of the things I pointed out was, we have to be better at never missing an opportunity, because I think we miss a lot of opportunities too. So how do you communicate the gospel hope to people?
There's no more compelling or moving way than to share your personal story. I think that is the most effective way. It's not flowery scripture. It's not, I mean, even though the Word of God is the most powerful instrument, but sometimes that's not what's going to reach somebody. It's how God worked in your life. Your personal story can make the biggest impact. And if we can practice, write your story down, or a part of your story, or whatever it is, and rehearse it. Get it down to a 1 to 2 minute clip, whatever, that you can just, hey, this is what Jesus did for me, and this is what it means for me eternally, and this is a hope I want to share with you. It can be a game changer for somebody that will affect eternity. I think that's the biggest impact. It's really very relatable. It's done in your words, in your language. Game changer.
Yeah, sharing with people that the hope that you have in Christ is not only based on your faith, but it is also based on the experience that you've had with Him and being in relationship with Him, that He's given you like a new outlook, a purpose in life, and that you understand what that is. And ultimately that you have seen His promises come true in your life and in the life of others. I mean, if that's not hope, I don't know what is, because you have a whole book full of them. And they're all so good.
Right.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.